All right, y'all, welcome to the Scott Horton Show. I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, author of the book Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and the brand new Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. And I've recorded more than 5,500 interviews since 2003, almost all on foreign policy, and all available for you at scotthorton.org. You can sign up for the podcast feed there, and the full interview archive is also available at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. All right, you guys, introducing Lyle J. Goldstein. And do I have it right here, Lyle? You are no longer at the Naval War College, but now you are Director of Asia Engagement at Defense Priorities?
Yeah, that's correct, Scott.
Great. So you no longer have to begin everything you say with that you're not trying to speak for the U.S. government here. Does that also mean that they're no longer listening to you?
I don't know about that, but yeah, it's nice to be no longer working for the government. I'm a bit more free to speak my mind and spend my time as I like. So it's good.
Yeah. All right. Good. Well, welcome to the semi-free world. All right. Now, big important piece here. Like Afghanistan, a war for Taiwan is unwinnable. Now, so, I don't know. Those are entirely different categories of war, right? A war with China would be a big, fun naval thing with big guns blazing and stuff, rather than patrolling Pashtuns in their neighborhoods down in Sanjan or Marja, right? So, what's the parallel here?
Well, Scott, thanks. And thanks again for having me. It's good to be back on your show. Right. I deliberately grabbed this comparison because I think a lot of Americans want to act like the situations are completely different. Part of it is right. It's a land campaign versus a naval campaign. But I mean, look, these are still all our people. These are American servicemen, and to my estimate, actually, this war over Taiwan will be much more bloody and probably less winnable. That is, if we really wanted to conquer those Pashtun villages and control them for the next 500 years, we could. It just took more effort than we wanted. But I don't even think if we wanted to put all our effort at controlling Taiwan, we could do it. We simply don't have the requisite firepower. We also don't have the will. But I'm just saying, in my view, why are the two situations eminently comparable? It's not just that they're two unwinnable wars, albeit of different types. One is a sort of counterinsurgency campaign. The other would be a classic, conventional war mostly. But bottom line, though, Scott, is these are civil wars. And that's, I think, what people don't quite get is civil wars are different than interstate wars. And in civil wars, all kinds of strange things happen. But I mean, the bottom line is what my observation in civil wars is that you're talking about entities that are willing to, to basically sacrifice everything in order to achieve their objectives. And that was true in Vietnam when the Viet Cong were, willing to sacrifice millions basically to win the day, and they did. And more or less it was true in Afghanistan. And I'm afraid that's true here too, where basically the entire identity of China is wrapped up in this question of Taiwan. Americans, we haven't really grappled with this, but I believe the Chinese have. And I'm afraid we are looking at a really bad situation if we don't yield to some realities. So that's where I'm at, Scott.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, a couple of things here. Well, first of all, just right there, it sounds like, I'm sure you're familiar with the various arguments about the somewhat nuanced and complicated history of Formosa and the native population there. And actually, I guess I did read, may have been something that you wrote here, I forget now, but recently that China first incorporated Taiwan was it the 1670s, 100 years before American independence from Great Britain? something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that it's gone back and
1683.
forth, and hey, the Taiwanese don't want to be ruled under the Communist Party, which is a communist party after all, and that's kind of another complication here. But I think it sounds like what you're saying is that all that is moot, because what really matters here is what is the Chinese Communist Party on the mainland's point of view, and their point of
Well,
view
right. I
is
mean,
they're
yeah,
taking
at
this
some
island
level,
back, huh?
right. I mean, at some level, it is just an issue of power. And, I'm a realist and I think power matters a lot. Power is probably, I don't know, of any given political international problem, power seems to be about 80 to 90% of, determining the outcome in most cases. But, it's not, but there are other factors, right? Moral factors, factors of national identity, things like that. And in this case, those are quite important. And I think Americans are very ahistorical. They're not particularly interested in the history of Formosa. And for good reason. It's an incredibly complex picture. My judgment, I've taught a lot about this and done a lot of reading on the subject. And my conclusion is that the island is more Chinese than not. Let's put it that way. And the Japanese did rule it for 50 years. That's absolutely true. But, look, the Japanese went on basically on a rampage of conquest that our country knows about, very well, right? It almost included Hawaii and included a lot of East Asia. So, we're well aware of that. And Taiwan was part of that sort of orgy of conquest, if you will. And that was well recognized by both President Roosevelt and also President Truman. And literally, they codified their assessment that Taiwan was Chinese. They said in the Cairo Declaration and in the Potsdam Declaration, both. They said it. It's very easy to find. Formosa is part of Chinese territory, must be given back. So they said that unequivocally. So, it'd be one thing if either Roosevelt or Truman had said it. The fact that they both said it tends to mean that it happened to be true. And that was America's understanding. So I don't, we can't suddenly rewrite history and go back and say, well, actually, we didn't really believe any of that,
Yeah.
So to me, the history is important. Americans should acquaint themselves with the history. We can't just say it doesn't matter. But as you point out, maybe it's all beside the point because China's going to do what they're going to do. And there's not much we can do to stop it.
Mm. Now, I saw a thing recently. I guess it's probably a year or so old, but it's John Mearsheimer, who's, I think, considered the dean or one of the leaders of the realist school of foreign policy in America from the University of Chicago.
Not my realist school.
a little bit of a different realist than you, huh?
Yes.
So he says in here, one of the things that he says in here that I thought was really important was, well, what's all the debate about? The decision has already been made, as he put it, by the American deep state. And that means the admirals, essentially, the intelligence services, and I guess the major arms industries in their think tanks, they're defending Taiwan. And it's not up to a vote. It's not up to the Congress. It's not really up to the president. It sure as hell isn't up to a bunch of, dissenters complaining about it after the fact in the media. We will defend Taiwan. And the Chinese need to know that. And hopefully that will continue to dissuade them from trying it.
Well, I mean, I think that's John's opinion. And I consider him a friend. So, no disrespect to him. But I think that's a bit, how to put it, this fails the realist test, in my view, because for realists, we don't think that hope is a strategy. But this seems to me it's very much premised on hope rather than reality. It may be true that in some places in Washington, there is a consensus, but that's 8,000 miles from the Taiwan Strait, and I don't think those people have a clue. And I dare say I hate to say it, but I don't think my friend John Mearsheimer has a clue what the actual military balance is in the Strait. And the fact is there is no military balance in the Strait. My assessment is China could take Taiwan probably within 72 hours. There would still probably be pockets of resistance to mop up after that, but it could be that quick in my estimate. So, we can talk all about, how to put it, this like consensus that's emerged, but I see very, very little to indicate that there's any kind of serious preparation by the United States to try, even if they were to try. So, we could talk about the various efforts that could be made. There's a lot of discussion about, well, we can sell Taiwan this and we can sell them that, and they can try this and they can make it into Fortress Taiwan. Look, is a Fortress Taiwan kind of conceivable to me? I suppose. A Fortress Taiwan, in my view, would look something like North Korea. It would have a lot of concrete poured over the place, all over the place. In other words, you just have tunnel after tunnel after tunnel, and that's really the only way. Now, is that sort of defense plausible? Well, I suppose you might require sacrificing, a quarter of the population of Taiwan ultimately, but it might do the work. But that kind of Fortress Taiwan takes decades to build, and I don't see any evidence that that's underway. Taiwan spends on a good year 2%, but often less than that, and they spend it on the wrong things. And all the evidence suggests they're not serious at all about defending themselves. So I really don't see. I see a lot of talk, but I don't see any real suggestion that Taiwan is defensible and will be defended.
Well, but maybe the admirals think that our carrier battle groups rule the seven seas. What the hell are you talking about? We'll just send in the Lincoln from here and the Eisenhower from here and the Nimitz from there and the Gerald Ford from over here, and we'll kick their ass. What are you talking about?
Well, right. I think Americans like sports analogies, so it is kind of funny to talk in those terms, Scott. But of course, we're talking about Americans getting killed, so it's not, it's a heavy subject. But the fact is, to my estimate, that carrier groups are almost worthless in a Taiwan scenario. The carriers are they're big, they're vulnerable, they're easily spotted, and they will be attacked by so many different vectors that they're more or less impossible to defend. What are those vectors? They'll be attacked by China's submarine force, which is nothing to sneeze at. They will be attacked by a very large PLA Air Force and Naval Air Force. So, literally we'll have hundreds of fighters coming at us and launching their missiles at extended range and whatnot. So, this is a pretty ominous set of forces that are coming at us. And then on top of that, you will have a totally new weapon, or I could say even more than one type of novel weapon, but this would be the so-called anti-ship ballistic missile, ASBIM, as it's been called. Now we can also talk about hypersonic weapons. So, the prospect of that carrier making it anywhere within, say, a carrier to be at all useful has to come within about 300 miles of Taiwan at least. It really has to come in closer than that. And to my estimate, there is really no way it could get that close. There's just too much firepower. It would be too dangerous, right? Are we really willing to sacrifice, the 5,000 Americans on that carrier or on the escorts, right? How many Americans in a battle group? I don't know, 30,000 or no, it couldn't be that many, but let's say 10,000. They are going to be in a very precarious spot. So all that firepower to me, Scott, means that more or less the battle groups cannot go in, the carrier battle groups. So so the fight is left to submarines essentially, and drones, I guess. Well, that's okay, but we simply don't have enough, and they don't have the firepower. And the Chinese spend all their time thinking about how to stop our submarine force because they know they're the only ones they really have to contend with. So To my estimate, Scott, it's there's no balance. And this, is, what makes this really scary, I think, is that this may well come true. I mean, China has really been developing the forces it needs. And I think they're ready. I think they were ready more or less 10 years ago, but they're more, they get more ready every day. I just saw today a new development, which has piqued my interest. One way that China will conquer Taiwan is by a very skillful use of drones themselves. Okay. But they've developed specialized drones for their purposes, right? Different purposes than we have. Their drones are not like hunting down terrorists and killing them. Their drones are for carrying ammunition across the strait, because those first couple lodgements of special forces, say, they're tough to reinforce. So they're going to fly drones in to get them the bullets and beans of bullets that they need to keep fighting for the first 24, 48 hours. I've seen now very good evidence that they have those ready to go.
All right, but so, I mean, from the Naval War College, what is your estimate of the American Admiralty's estimate of the situation here? They understand the reality as you teach it, or they're listening?
Well, hold on. I don't work at Naval War College anymore. And I just want to be very clear about that. I did work there for 20 years. I'm proud of what I did there, but that's in my past now.
Yeah, no, but so, now it is. But I just mean up until recently, I mean, do these guys read what you write? And is there some do you have any indication that the admirals say to themselves that this guy Goldstein ain't too far off and we got to recognize that, or don't they, or what?
Well, my observation, having worked many decades with the U.S. military, is, these people are, they're military professionals. They're apolitical generally, and they are, the way they work is, okay, the president has given us a mission. We have these, ships and platforms to achieve the mission, and we're going to achieve the mission. There's no question of can we achieve this? Can we do this? Is the mission feasible? It's not a question they ask. The question is how to achieve the mission with the resources they are given. And so, what I fear here is one of the reasons this is a bit of a nightmare is I do think there's a lot of misperception here. A kind of thought that this is something, our Navy rules the sea as it always has, and we have no worries. The Chinese Navy can't stack up, so it's an island. We got this. I think that is very, very backward thinking. Look, I think there is some inkling at the Pentagon that there's a problem. Let's put it that way. I mean, you can read the comments of former Assistant Secretary of Defense David Ochmanek. He was in a piece featured with me alongside in a piece for Real Clear Investigations. I think it came out in early 2020 or late 2019. You can look it up. And Ochmanek says in that publicly, he says, we've done more than a dozen war games, and in every one, the United States loses these war games. So he said that, not me. I think he's probably right. And I mean, that should be really troubling, right? I mean, if you run a war game over and over and over again and you lose every time, I mean, some people dismiss that as saying, well, it's just the military industrial complex asking for more money. I don't buy it. I think that's the real deal. I'm afraid I don't think there is a technological solution. Now, Ochmanek thinks there is. He says, well, what this means is we have to buy lots of fancy cruise missiles. They're called LRASM. There are this is one idea of how to destroy a Chinese invasion fleet, but I can give you my reasons why I don't think that will work. But this, leave it to American technologists to, take an impossible situation and say, hey, all we need is the right technology and we can handle this. Well, I mean, that's what they said for 20 years in Afghanistan. We'll just build these. I mean, more about Afghanistan a lot more than me. You wrote the book on it. And of course, you're right about everything, Scott. But I mean, the point is, like these people said, we just need we'll fight at night. We'll kick down doors. We'll use special tactics. We'll use our fancy night vision goggles and our helicopters to ferry us around. And use those heavily armored trucks to drive through the valleys in Afghanistan. I mean, there's always a so-called technical solution, but sometimes there isn't. And in my read of the situation in the Taiwan Strait is there is no technical solution to the fact that China is 90 miles off the coast of this island. I mean, imagine if some country tried to defend Cuba against the United States, if we wanted to take over Cuba. But just imagine Russia, Russia figured this out, actually. The Kremlin did, and they figured out the only way to defend Cuba was to put nuclear weapons on it. Now, we could put nuclear weapons on Taiwan, and actually, Scott, probably your readers don't remember, there was a day in the 1950s where we did put nuclear weapons on Taiwan. Eisenhower did that, and he did it very specifically because he knew that really was the only way to assuredly defend Taiwan was to put nuclear weapons on it. Of course, we removed those. Why did we remove them? Because China said we had to, as part of the agreement to have a relationship. So way back in the 60s, 70s, this was all discussed. It was all worked out. We removed our bases. We removed our nuclear weapons, removed all our forces, and came to an agreement that actually, more or less, Taiwan is Chinese. And we were going to, remove all our forces. So, Americans somehow forgot all of that. But I think probably we need to rediscover. Look, I'm not advocating that we surrender the whole Pacific to China. No way. But the Pacific is very large, and Taiwan is a particular case. We have defense agreements with Philippines and Japan. In my view, we should retain those. I think we can reform those relationships. But what I'm saying is, if China does conquer Taiwan, and they might, it's not the end of the world. It doesn't mean China owns the Pacific. We shouldn't panic and act like the sky is falling. It's just a little island off the coast of China. That's all it is.
Well, a couple things here. Well, first of all, but the semiconductors, what about that, Lyle? It's not just an island. It's an island with really important computer manufacturing facilities on it.
Well, that is an interesting wrinkle. I don't know that that really changes the situation. I mean, honestly, it may make it more appetizing for China, right? We can imagine they may have adjusted their war plan to account for the fact that they would like to not destroy that factory or those factories, and maybe even try to capture those personnel, make sure they don't get flown out as the missiles start hitting. I could imagine that. But do I think, this justifies the U.S. Going into a catastrophic war, risking nuclear war, risking a massive defeat? No, I don't think so at all. There are there's some contingency planning. It seems to be underway, as far as I understand it, that the U.S. is seeking to kind of replicate some of this technology. I also, people have wondered, and I guess I do too, would the U.S. target these facilities if worse comes to worse? In other words, we don't want them to fall into China's hands. I don't know, though, that we would really stomach pummeling our ally here, or erstwhile ally, as a conflict was erupting, just to, as it were, to, that kind of scorched earth policy. I don't, but to me, I don't think, I think those are commercial calculations, and we can wonder what would happen to the global economy. I look, if the U.S. and China go to war, or China tries to conquer Taiwan, absolutely the global economy is going to have a major hiccup. I mean, if not total indigestion for a few years. But again, I don't think it needs to be catastrophic from an economic point of view. I mean, that is to say, I think recovery would be quite possible. Look, Scott, I mean, a lot of people say, well, Lyle, the problem with what you're saying is you're just basically saying, well, China's going to take it and there's nothing we can do about it. So you're just leaving these poor people to their fate. Well, I guess that's true in some respect. However, here's what I'll say is that, my guess is if the U.S. were to kind of adopt a kind of position of clarity on this and just say, hey, look, we feel badly for you folks in Taiwan, but sorry, we can't defend you, and you're on your own. And if we're actually candid with the Taiwanese people about the situation in that respect, I actually think at that point Taiwan would say, okay, look, we need to rethink this, and they would start talking with the mainland. And
Right.
Now I know Americans generally going to be very skeptical of talking with the mainland. Fine, but the fact is, there's a pretty good record of negotiated solutions to problems, and I don't think China's not that eager to have a bloodbath in the Taiwan Strait, and I do think this would entail a lot of people getting killed, both Taiwanese and Chinese. So, I mean, they'd like to avoid that. So I think a negotiated solution to this is quite within the realm of possibility if both sides were serious. And that, by the way, people forget in 2015, the end of 2015, I think December, the president of Taiwan, Ma Ying-jeou, and Xi Jinping sat down and had a very cordial meeting in Singapore. So it's not that far-fetched, like the idea that there could be some kind of meeting of the minds, an agreement. Would Taiwan get everything it wants? Absolutely not. But probably China wouldn't either. It would be a negotiated solution. So I think that's probably the best way to go for everybody involved, including the Taiwanese, who are looking at, if this war unfolds, Taiwan, a significant amount of Taiwanese people will get killed. It's terrible. So,
yeah. Hey, you all. It's the digital age, and dating is no exception. Well, Drom is a new values-based dating app. Pick deal breakers and deal makers to find like-minded people that care about the same core values as you. Drom can help you find your perfect match locally or anywhere in the world, and it's video only for more authenticity. Drom is free and available for Apple and Android phones and tablets. To install the app in your browser, go to drom.date/Scott. Click the Apple or Android button and use the invite code Scott to sign up. Now get on out there. Some of y'all have a problem. You've got chickens, but you don't want to stand around throwing food at them all day because of all the important stuff you have to do. Well, the solution to that is to get the free-range feeder from freerangefeeder.com. The all-stainless steel free-range feeder has been developed to satisfy the needs of the poultry, chicken hobbyist, and the homesteader. The convertible design allows for 4 different mounting methods. Go to freerangefeeder.com/Scott or use promo code Scott to get 10% off and get the free ebook. Subscribe to their newsletter to immediately receive your free copy of Getting Started with Backyard Chickens. That's freerangefeeder.com/Scott. Well, and so this goes back to what you were saying about the limits of American naval capabilities there. And I'm glad you mentioned ballistic missiles. I mean, first of all, the sea-skimming supersonic cruise missiles, the anti-ship missiles, I think just on the face of it, as you're talking about, they have a longer range than our F-18s. And so that pretty much is checkmate on the aircraft carriers. But then even on top of that, you mentioned anti-ship ballistic missiles. And this is something that carriers just have no defense from whatsoever and are, I guess, the targeting is sophisticated enough now that you can go ahead and hit an aircraft carrier dead center with a ballistic missile and sink that thing.
Well, you're probably right in some respects. I mean, you're certainly correct to identify that I did not mention the sea skimming cruise missiles, which are supersonic now. That's right. I mean, Russia really has pioneered this technology. And Russia's about to deploy a hypersonic cruise missile Zircon, which the Chinese do not have, but they want it really badly. And believe me, I think they may be depositing some red envelopes in Moscow to make sure they get their hands on the design. But China does have supersonic, not hypersonic, but supersonic cruise missiles, and we don't. We do not have a supersonic cruise missile. We were funding one, but it didn't come to fruition. So I'm just saying, you're exactly right that in many respects, our surface forces are really in enormous danger. You can't overstate that. And these cruise missiles, these supersonic cruise missiles that you rightly identify as a major problem, are fired by both Chinese submarines. Then they're fired also by Chinese frigates and cruisers, and by the way, also small boats. Their small boats can fire these, And then let's go one more step, and all their air forces fire these weapons too. So we're talking about thousands of these supersonic exocets, if you will, attacking our carrier group, and that's
God,
just
really? Yeah, so I
there's
did not
nothing you can do.
realize that at all. Thousands of them,
Oh
huh?
yeah,
And from
oh
all
yeah, yeah,
different
yeah,
platforms. Wow.
and from all different vectors. I mean, that's how you sink a carrier group. Is I'm hypothesizing, of course, but I'm saying you take it from all these all different vectors simultaneous. It's a and you overload the defenses. I mean,
And the ship's only
so
defense against these things is a machine gun, correct? I mean, it's a badass
yeah.
machine
Well,
gun,
I
but it's
mean,
just a machine gun.
there are other kinds of people have talked about different kinds of defenses for ships. I mean, and I mean, look, part of the counter argument is, well, the ocean is really big and targeting for these things is pretty hard. So I mean, I don't want to say that it's um, black and white here, but you know, look, let's use a historical example. That's the best evidence we have of the British fleet going up against the Argentines. This was, by the way, we're coming up on an anniversary, I guess, for that conflict from the 1982 it was. And the Argentines fielded a grand total of eight of these Exocet missiles. I think half of them hit with devastating effect. That's a pretty good ratio. China would have 8,000 or 80,000 of these to play with. So it's just, I'm just saying, and the defenses, yeah, you might shoot down a few of them, or you'd be able to use decoys and so forth, but some of them are going to get through. And, another thing people don't realize is, okay, maybe it's true that one of these exocets or these sea skimming cruise missiles, perhaps you don't sink a carrier with one hit or two hits. Fair enough, but it's a mission kill. It means the carrier is disabled enough that it can't launch aircraft, and even a worse scenario, Scott, what if that carrier is disabled, more or less? And then you got, all of a sudden you have 5,000 American hostages there, stuck out there. We have to try to mount a rescue mission. Imagine that. I mean, that could be catastrophic for the U.S. Navy, where our ships are trying to rescue ships that have been disabled, and it becomes a shooting gallery because the Chinese know exactly where all our ships are coming to. Right? They know, So this is, in a way, is an ideal targeting solution for them. And this is a total nightmare, Scott. I mean, I think we have a great a great Navy and armed forces, and they want to defend our country, and they are capable of defending our country. But you have to put them in a scenario where they have a good chance of winning, and this is not that scenario. So if this battle were fought head to head, Chinese Navy versus U.S. Navy out in, near Hawaii or let's just say it, Midway, I think we'll clean their clocks. I think we're much better, a lot more experience and so forth. But that's a different kind of fight than what we're talking about. I mean, if we fight this war right off the Chinese coast, the tables are turned against us. And this is the worst possible. That's why I often use the Gettysburg analogy. Did I use this once on your show? Anyway, this Union cavalry officer comes to Gettysburg and says, looks over these hills shaped in a fishhook and says, "This is good ground. We might be able to beat the Confederate Army here because of this favorable ground." Well, this is the opposite. Taiwan is the worst possible ground to try to fight China. It's very favorable to them.
And now, Lyle, can you address the anti-ship ballistic missiles? Because we don't hear a lot about that, but I read a great thing by the War Nerd years ago about how game, set, match, aircraft carriers are obsolete. They're nothing but essentially, shiny stars on the shirt of some admiral, but they're nothing but a death trap for the 5,000 aboard if they ever get in a real fight with anybody who knows how to fight back.
Well, I recall listening to some admirals talk about the 1980s and saying already that, the use of aircraft carriers to try to move them aggressively into, say, the Barents or the area near Kamchatka, close to the Russian coast to assault Russian bases, I'm told by these carrier admirals that they were retired at the time, but they said they thought they would be destroyed completely, and that they would never make it anywhere close to the Russian coast. So, I mean, arguably, this technology, frankly, was obsolete decades and decades ago, well before the advent of the anti-ship ballistic missile. And the only reason the aircraft carrier survived as kind of the capital ship of the fleet was that, well, not only the prestige that accrued to it during World War II, but also that the Korean War and the Vietnam War, where we were in situations where we were more or less beating up on countries that didn't have, that couldn't wield any, that had no navies. Vietnam didn't have a navy, more or less, nor did North Korea. So what I'm saying is, so those were favorable situations for aircraft carriers, but so that led them to stick around. But the truth is, they've for such a long time, more than half a century, they've been increasingly vulnerable, especially to anti-ship cruise missiles, but also submarines. So, right. So here comes along a new kind of weapon, which I think has just sort of put an exclamation point or underlined this fact which already existed, and that is that you don't have to do much damage to these ships to make it a mission kill. Mm-hmm. And they can be targeted. I mean, that's a pretty big look. The Chinese have worked very hard to develop real-time surveillance of these things using satellites, for example. And so I do believe they're able to track our carriers as they move all around, that become experts at sort of watching our bases in various ways. They have an enormous merchant marine and fishing fleet. They've also developed a large aerial contingent, which flies at great distances to look over the Pacific. They're developing drones that will play this role too. But I mean, the point is, to sink a carrier, you need real-time information about where the carrier is. But I don't think that's going to prove very difficult for China. Mm-hmm. I think they've developed probably not one means, not two means, but redundant, maybe 5 to 10 different ways that they track our carriers as they move around the ocean. Like I said, including drones, satellites, also fishing boats and so forth, submarines, drones. So I mean, if you can track them, then you have a very substantial chance of killing them. Yes, I think that's right. Now, has our Navy been thinking hard about how to defeat this thing? Of course, and you can be assured that one of the main ways our Navy wants to defeat them is by attacking at the source, right? Shoot the archer, right? So this leads you into that situation where, we suspect that this province in this warehouse is holding these archers, these DF-21D or DF-26 launchers. So, Mr. President, we think it would be advisable to, take preemptive action to strike at these warehouses deep inside China because we fear that they would target our carriers. That's how you get in this cycle of escalation where, both sides have incentive to strike first. And that's really disturbing. Mm-hmm. But the chances of us trying to wipe out all these systems preemptively, I think is just a pipe dream. Mm-hmm. I've never met anybody who took that really seriously. It's just too hard to do. And the geography is too complex. The Chinese are excellent at hiding things too. So they learned that from the Korean War where they fought us and we owned the air. So they learned to be very skillful with how they move things along the ground.
They're being pretty blatant here, building a mock-up of an American aircraft carrier out in the desert, right where we can definitely see it and where they can practice identifying it from different ways, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, look, China has, I think, for a long time taken into account that they have to play a kind of psychological game with us. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if this was sort of just a message and, they want us to have this conversation, Scott. They want us to talk over the fact that our ships are targeted. They want us more or less to know that because I don't think they want to have a war with the United States. They would much rather avoid that, but the message is, if you try this, you're going to get a very bloody nose or worse. Unfortunately, I think what they're saying is pretty credible though. So, but I mean, look, it's not hard to find Chinese messaging of this type. And whereas China used to be very, what was the phrase? They used to hide their capability, bide their time. That was kind of their strategy during the 70s and 80s and maybe the 90s. And now it's shifted toward a more, now they're more confident of their capabilities and they're more sort of brazen. But look, this idea that they're going to take over the Pacific or take over the world, I think is totally wrong. I don't see any evidence of that. But do they want Taiwan? Absolutely. They want Taiwan. Like, no question in my mind. Could they take it? I think so. I think they could take it tomorrow or next week. I don't think they will. I think they'll certainly wait for the Olympics, which are in February. I don't think they want to spoil that party. That's a lot of investment that they put in there. After that, though, I'm very concerned. And, as they've said many times, they will operate when it's convenient for them. And actually, I've been watching what's been happening in Ukraine and stuff like that. And I just wonder if Mr. Putin owes Mr. Xi a favor, maybe, the kind of it's quite possible that China would act under cover of some kind of other crisis. They've done that in the past. In 1962, for example, when they attacked India rather suddenly, they had a cover. The cover was the Cuban Missile Crisis, actually. And so when the Chinese president Nehru called over to President Kennedy, said, "Hey, John, can you send me some, a couple of airborne brigades and some bombers to fend off the Chinese?" And Kennedy didn't even take the call because he was busy with the Cuban Missile Crisis. So, you get my point, Scott, is the Chinese are very strategic. They will.
Yeah. Although in this case, is there really any reason to believe that Putin's done anything provocative on Ukraine's border there other than just the Americans claim so?
The evidence I've seen, I see a lot of forces moving. I haven't looked at any satellite photography recently, but I've been watching, certainly at sea, there's a lot of activity. So, I don't know. Look, it doesn't make, again, I don't see anything happening before the Olympics, and I don't see any reason why Putin would undertake any kind of military action now. So I'm kind of at a loss. I don't think that I think this is more like, the Russians, I think, want to keep us on edge a bit because partly because we're keeping them on edge. This is kind of like, they're like, if you're going to move forces around in our neighborhood, we're going to move forces around in your sensitive areas. So that's the, I guess that's the way I would interpret it. But what I'm trying to get at, Scott, is that I think we have to consider that there could be serious coordination between Moscow and Beijing on these things.
Well, speaking of that, I wanted to ask you about, this is probably the least quoted Trump quote ever when he said that, yeah, I was talking to Henry Kissinger, and Henry Kissinger said to me that I was smart, that we should suck up to Russia to balance them against China, because China, they're the real bad guys, right? And I thought, wow, there's something. And I noticed, I predicted and was right, that nobody wanted to talk about that because here Henry Kissinger is Henry Kissinger. He's the grayest of the graybeards. And if he says that maybe we should do that, then that takes all of the secret conspiracy theory out of Trump wanting to talk with the Russians because everybody knows he's a China hawk. And so that makes sense on the face of it. And then, of course, there are people who I guess would rather be friendly toward China in order to balance them against the Russians in the old Nixonian model. Although, I guess fewer people are willing to talk that way now. But certainly some more Democrat-leaning people feel that way about it. So I guess, Mr. Realist, what I'm interested in is whether you think that any of this is smart at all, that we ought to be balancing or attempting to balance Russia versus China or play them off of each other or any other thing. Or do you think that can only succeed in doing what sounds like you're describing, pushing them together, where they're willing to work together against us?
Great question, Scott. I think about this a lot. I think you're absolutely right that Trump was trying to do that. He sent Bolton over there. I remember it very distinctly. I think it was already in 2017 or 2018. He sent Bolton to Moscow, which in itself was weird because, I don't think the Russians have any great affection for John Bolton. And I think his Bolton's mission was to say, basically to scare the crap out of the Russians and be like, look, China is becoming extremely powerful. Do you fully grasp what that means for Russia? They're going to take over Russia or whatever, and you guys need to cooperate with us, and we will help you. That kind of thing. And I think Bolton just got kind of brushed off in Moscow and not taken seriously, partly because of so much hostility already in the U.S.-Russian relationship his sort of mission, as it were, to pull. I call this a Kissinger move in reverse. Was ill-fated because there was just too much bad blood in U.S.-Russian relations, and nobody could really overcome that. But there are larger problems with this, Scott. I mean, there is this kind of elegance to it, I guess. But I mean, the fact is, the Russians, well, for one, look, Russia and China have gotten along well for the last 30 years, more really, 35 years. Sure, there is some bad blood there, but I think Americans may even kind of overstate that. So, look, there hasn't been a single crisis in Russia-China relations of any kind, really. We can point to tiny little hiccups, but nothing more than that. And that's a pretty good record of achievement. And I think Putin and company have succeeded more or less in creating a consensus in Russia that, more or less they have to work well with China. And Xi Jinping has done the same, meaning like, look, we're going to work with the Russians and I don't care what anybody thinks about it. We're just going to do it. And so they've been kind of determined to work together and bridge all the gaps and a lot of historical mistrust and all that. And it's worked well for both countries. And now I got to say, it's an amazing, I would call it amazing kind of intellectual lash up there. I mean, when I watch the Chinese news, and I do almost every day, it's shocking the degree to which they just sort of drink up all the Russian talking points and spout them back out. I mean, in other words, they just seem to be in love with the Russian kind of perspective on the world, and doesn't go completely the other way, but it's pretty close. I mean, you can find Russians who are suspicious of China, but generally the elite has sort of taken on this view that they're just going to get along with China no matter what. But I mean, look, if you take the realism to another level, would Russia really benefit from hostility with China? No. Russia would be in a world of hurt if they get in a bad relationship with China. I mean, they would have to defend that huge border against China. I mean, that's a pretty ominous possibility. So, I mean, it's not that the Russians are sort of kind and trusting. It's that they know they're in a tough situation, that they are, that China is a really strong power right on its border. And the Russians are, they're pretty confident in their abilities, but they're also like, look, we don't want to be in a hostile relationship with China. So why would we want to ally with the West against China? So I don't think that's in the cards. And I don't, playing this kind of game, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Yeah, it works in a kind of desperate situation. But I think there is a kind of a better way. And I mean, Kissinger said this himself. He said the objective of this kind of triangular diplomacy is to get along better with each of the poles than they get along with each other. And that's a valid objective. I mean, I think if we had a better relationship with Russia, then they would ease up a little bit on leaning on China. If we had a better relationship with China, on the other hand, they would also be a little more reluctant in their embrace of Russia. So that's the basic logic. But it doesn't mean, the fact that, like, we're not going to pull them apart at this point. They're very much in a relationship of, synergistic development at this point. And I think, we have to just live with that and realize that the sky is not falling, and that, some kind of Russia-China alliance is going to take over the world. It doesn't keep me up at night. I think they're more concerned about Western kind of encroachments on their sphere.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks very much for coming back on the show. It's been great.
Okay, Scott. Yeah, my pleasure. Always enjoy talking with you. It's a great show, and you do great work.
Thank you. All right, you guys. That's Lyle Goldstein. He's now over there with Danny Davis and them at Defense Priorities. And check out this very important piece that they ran over there in the national interest. Like Afghanistan, a war for Taiwan is unwinnable.
The Scott Horton Show, Anti-War Radio, can be heard on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA, APSradio.com, antiwar.com, scotthorton.org, and libertarianinstitute.org.